G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 fantasy video. Today we're looking at my team selection for race week 22 ahead of the Las Vegas Grand Prix in just over a week's time. As always, if you're new around here, you're enjoying the content, you like what you see, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. So before we jump into how I'm looking ahead of Las Vegas, let's quickly take a deep dive into how my team performed in Brazil. It was a pretty mixed bag of results, if I'm completely honest. Obviously, great result for Lando Norris, Max Verstappen as usual, Sergio Perez back in the mix for fantasy, Fernando Alonso on the podium. But I suppose as far as my team was concerned, you can see here outside of Max and Lando, who are the two most in-form and consistent fantasy assets in the game at the moment, the rest of it wasn't that great to look at. Before we look at, I guess, how George Russell did, Daniel Ricciardo, Oscar Piastri, it was a bit of a debacle from lap one in the Grand Prix. Obviously, the sprint race itself, qualifying, even though there were a few little surprises here and there, I didn't think there was anything too much that stood out to me. Obviously, the Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso second row lockout, very big surprise for a lot of us. I don't think we expected Aston Martin to bounce back quite as impressively as they did. And then obviously Fernando got that podium, which I'll get to in a moment. But great weekend for the Aston Martins, and not so great weekend for Mercedes. But I think the surprise, the heartache for me as a Ferrari fan that stood out was obviously Leclerc's, run in with the barrier in the formation lap. Obviously, not great in any weekend for any driver, but the fact that he just seems to have the worst luck at the moment, and it just seems like classic Ferrari as well, doesn't bode well for Charles Leclerc. It obviously creates that narrative around Ferrari engine reliability, and I'll get to more of that in a moment. But I guess even beyond the formation lap, that first turn, Alex Albon, Kevin Magnussen both collided. Then debris obviously hit Ricciardo's car. Piastri copped a few strays as well. Thankfully, they were both able to rejoin the race with the race ultimately red flag. But that was pretty much the end of their day in terms of fantasy production, in terms of a chance at the points. Both guys looked like they had very good race pace and definitely could have contended for top 10. Oscar, I thought, would have been able to push for top 5 even. But that obviously kind of spelt the end of my fantasy weekend. I think the decisions for the last few weeks have been pretty good. I haven't really regretted any single decision. I think George Russell was probably the most knee-jerk call I've made on my team in the last couple of months or so. But up until his retirement, I thought he'd at least be on for a reasonable points finish given his drive in the sprint on the Saturday. But obviously that DNF really hurt. 1 point to come from that. So not too happy about it. 331 points and another kind of red arrow down to 8.6k. So feel like I'm in a bit of a free fall at the moment. I'm not sure even 5k seems within reach unless a miracle comes up in the next couple of weeks. But hoping autopilot that I'm going to use in Vegas. There's maybe a few things that go my way. We'll have to wait and see. But at this point, clinging on to the top 10k for dear life. But I suppose on the topic of George Russell, I think the most interesting thing to me, Mercedes in general, was how much car performance they lost in Brazil. Obviously, I think they were trying to compensate for some of the lower speed corners, but their top speed absolutely suffered. They were being overtaken by Alpine. AlphaTauri were having a go at them. And then obviously George Russell had to retire the car. Lewis was struggling throughout the afternoon. He only came away with 13 points. A lot of people had, their extra DRS boost on Lewis. They're 2 times at the very least anyway, so not an overly impressive fantasy afternoon for him. You throw in the Leclerc DNF, Mercedes struggles, and a lot of you guys that had limitless teams obviously suffered as well. So a pretty underwhelming weekend for a lot of people. But interestingly enough, a lot of people that didn't have limitless in Brazil outscored those people that used it in Brazil, much like 2 weeks prior when I activated limitless and then Charles and Lewis were disqualified. A lot of non-limitless teams outscored my team. So it's just funny how, we try and wait to use our chips at the most optimal times. And I think it was the right decision, regardless of the outcome. but it is classic fantasy in a sense that you just can't seem to get the rub of the green, no matter how much planning and research and whatnot you do to prepare your team for a weekend when a big chip is on the table. So yeah, I think a lot of discussion, a lot of debate needs to be had around what our teams are going to look like in Las Vegas at a circuit we've never raced at. Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider. The Aston Martin resurgence, as I pointed out, the Mercedes decrease in performance, and then obviously Ferrari and other cars that are running that Ferrari power unit that have that lack of reliability. Obviously, the double Alfa Romeo DNF continues to emphasize, I guess, the gremlins that Ferrari seem to have at the moment around their engine components. So I think if we do see a grid penalty, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, in Las Vegas for, say, the Ferraris, Charles Leclerc, for instance, with that hydraulics problem, then maybe that puts them on the radar. But if we don't see them starting further at the back of the grid for those overtakes, those positions gained, then I would be steering clear of a couple of teams heading into Las Vegas. So we'll quickly take a look at what my team is looking like if I was to make no changes in Vegas, which I don't think will be the case. I've got 3 free transfers. My only trade for Brazil was Sergio Perez into George Russell, which had I left my team probably would have been better off. But that seems to be the case for a lot of people. I think Perez was due for a bounce back weekend. I kind of had in the back of my mind an expectation that this would happen when everyone moves off him. He has a good one, and that was the same in Circuit of the Americas the week before. DNF'd in Qatar, had a bounce back performance at Austin, and then much the same again 2 weeks later. So George Russell, I think, is the first name off my team for Las Vegas, only because of the fact that Mercedes' performance, as I've mentioned, is not looking great. I do wonder if 2 weeks is enough time for them to rectify this. They have historically this season anyway not been great in those higher speed circuits. So I think for me, unless we see something remarkable change in those 3 free practice sessions from Lewis or George, I think they're probably an avoid for me this weekend, or at least for Vegas. Apologies. So, I mean, the easiest and most logical swap for me would just to be moving Sergio Perez back into that lineup. I can't see myself doing that. Even though the Red Bull should be extremely competitive, the Las Vegas circuit is essentially just a rectangle, and some have compared it to Monza in terms of how high those top speeds are going to be. So I think Red Bull will be competitive. Do I trust Sergio Perez enough after being burnt by him a number of times in the last couple months? Not enough. I can still happily cover his output in the Red Bull constructor. But again, watch some people see his performance most recently in Brazil and pile back in on him. I still don't think he's a bad option to have in your team, but for me, I'm not so sure he's the one for me. So assuming I don't go down that route, I think the most logical approach for me could well be a Charles Leclerc introduction into the team. That is largely contingent on if Ferrari do take a grid penalty at Las Vegas. There was speculation that this could occur before Mexico. That didn't eventuate. We didn't see anything like that in Brazil either. And given the fact that he had those hydraulic problems on the formation lap in Brazil, it could be very possible we see Ferrari take some new parts for the car. So should that happen, and at the time of recording, we have not heard anything yet from Ferrari. It is still only by the time this goes out, a Wednesday, the week before the race. So not really much in the way of announcements comes through the Twitter feed at this early stage, but I fully expect we could hear something from Ferrari in the lead up to Vegas. So should that ultimately eventuate, I think Charles, for me, fits in quite nicely with that grid penalty. If he takes, the 10, 15, 20 place grid penalty, plenty of opportunity for overtakes at Las Vegas. Ferrari got very good straight line speed, so I certainly think he could be an option here. That leaves the door open just enough for Alex Albon. Williams, again, at Monza, did very well there. Alex Albon has been outperforming that Williams all season, and they are known for having an exceptionally strong high top speed as well. So this, for me, could be something I lean towards. I'm 99% certain I'm going to use the autopilot at Las Vegas, partly because it's going to be an insurance policy for me at a circuit we've never raced at. It's a street circuit. Typically, street circuits have a higher DNF rate on average. So I think that mitigates the likelihood of someone like Max Verstappen, in the off chance this happens, hitting the wall, having an incident, and then obviously having that 2 times points total affected drastically. So I think I'll most likely put the autopilot for this week. Lando proved again in Brazil that he is a force to be reckoned with fantasy-wise. Another driver of the day performance, another top-scoring weekend for him. And then if you throw Charles Leclerc into the mix with those overtakes, those positions gained, typically if we see drivers come from the back of the field into kind of the high points finishing places, then they are almost certainly always on for a driver of the day nomination as well. So I think there's 3 certainly good options here to autopilot, all of which could be the highest score of that weekend if things go as I perhaps anticipate right now. But again, things could change next week and Ferrari could suddenly be off the boil for me. But if we don't see a grid penalty, I just can't see one happening for Ferrari in Abu Dhabi. It makes absolutely no sense for them to take one, given it's the last race of the season. So I'd assume if they do take one, it has to be realistically in Las Vegas. The only other lineup I'm really looking at right now, and it's hard to make a call on too many different combinations this far out from the race weekend, but one particular option that has caught my eye has been Fernando Alonso. Obviously, we know how good those downgrades for Aston Martin were in Brazil, where they've kind of stripped the car back to kind of the specifications that we saw earlier in the season, or at least part of it. Fernando, his best performance in a number of weeks since the Netherlands. He had 62 points there, so a great result for him. Lance Stroll as well. He had his best fantasy performance all season. I'm not suggesting get him into your team right away because he has been prone to inconsistencies and poor qualifying performances in the past, but a great sign for Aston Martin regardless. I think obviously if Aston Martin can continue this consistency, this momentum heading into Las Vegas, then I think he becomes an option for sure. That gives me 20.4 to play with. So there's one way I could go about it and get in someone like Carlos Sainz, but the Ferrari reliability does concern me a little bit. The fact that he wasn't the one that had a hydraulics problem like Leclerc did in Brazil makes me think he could be prone to it in the next couple of races. So assuming I steer clear of Ferrari or Ferrari adjacent drivers for the last 2 races of the season, I could alternatively run, instead of Daniel Ricciardo, Alex Albon in this middle position, keep Oscar Piastri. And that means, first of all, we don't see any budget drivers in this lineup. The Williams, as I talked about, exceptional straight line speed. And I think Piastri would have been on for a really good result in Brazil had it not been for that first lap incident where he caught strays from the Albon Magnussen crash. So whether or not McLaren are able to rival, some of the other teams in those tops with the top speeds, I still think we've seen from them over a number of races recently that they've kind of been talking down their opportunities, their expectations at certain races like Circuit of the Americas, like Mexico. Even at Brazil, they weren't, overly confident. But the fact that Lando Norris, for instance, is just continually delivering podium after podium, driver of the day after driver of the day. And then Oscar had his qualifying ruined. I guess he was kind of at fault for that. But he had exceptional simulation pace for the race in the lead up to Sunday. So fully expect he'll bounce back in Las Vegas if all things go to plan. But I think that's just a couple of different options. I also really like the no budget driver risk. AlphaTauri, I know, have looked very good. Sonoda, I just don't think in the teams I've looked at fits quite into the builds I want to go towards, but I still think he is a really good option. Ricciardo is an exceptional enabler at the price he's currently at. So if you're short on budget, he's not only the cheapest asset in the game, but probably the cheapest and the best asset to get into your team if you're trying to facilitate other moves. And then obviously Alonso, as I've talked about, I think he can certainly be one on your watch list heading into Las Vegas. But I think I just wanted to get some preliminary thoughts down. I'll absolutely be back with my race week preview and final thoughts next week ahead of the Grand Prix. But hopefully this is enough to hold you guys over until that point in time. As always, as I said at the start of the video, please like it, subscribe if you haven't already. Would love to hit 1.4K subscribers by the end of the season, just under 1.3 now. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It goes a very long way to helping me develop and grow this channel. But I think I'll leave it there for now, guys. Appreciate you dropping by, and I'll see you all very soon.